ending of the project, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be busy with that so that we can solve that problem.
Mm. Okay. We
Yeah.
we
Hello,
have,
everyone.
we have
Lovely.
hello.
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 Happy New Year.
Ma'am.
Yeah, thank
New Year,
you.
you
You too.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
So we are live,
Yeah,
and
still alive.
so I will start and share my presentation.
Please. Okay.
Yes. Oh, hold on.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my screen? No, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whenever you have joined me today in Zoom setting. Happy New Year to everyone. So just a technical remark to start off. Please, to everyone, keep your cameras on if you wish, but do not switch on, but do switch on off your microphones until you take the floor. Also, I would encourage everyone to introduce yourself through the chat function. Please write down your name, email address, and your research project, business activities, and whatever additional information you want to share with the network coordinators. So please do that. Please remember that this chat will be saved and shared with everyone so that everyone gets that information. The presentation is recorded and is live on YouTube. It will be also then transferred on TV channels. So just be aware of that. So I would like first of all to thank the in-kind supporter UCEM, the University College of Estate Management, for their support on the Zoom platform, which allows us our smooth dissemination of the seminar series. And this seminar I have just given a new name, Saturday Idea Exchange. And I would like to acknowledge and thank here Sharon Drew, who is also has joined our network very recently and has graced this meeting today with her presence. She coined this word idea exchange and I liked it, and that I named our seminars as Saturday Idea Exchange. And so thank you very much, Sharon Drew. I acknowledge the support of champions, gold, silver, and bronze level awardees 2021 of our network, who have supported various essential activities from keeping the coordinators list up to date to various engagement worldwide and research and other associated projects and activities. I acknowledge the support of PASS TV and Two-Row TV, who are going to put our these activities and YouTube and other recordings on their channels. And so it will be visible to many other viewers worldwide, and they will be free to view. I would like to thank also on the outset today for all of you to make this time and attend this Saturday Idea Exchange seminar series. And also, let me acknowledge that today we have an excellent panel who have made that time and are going to introduce their ideas here. So I will not introduce the panelists just now, but whenever speakers just now, but whenever they come, I will do that. So just to take the start, I will bring you to the speed of the network activities. So welcome to you all. Welcome to the Saturday Idea Exchange monthly seminar on the several aspects of SDGs and global sustainable futures, organized at the occasion of the first session of the second year of Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnership Network. I'm Dr. Renuka Thakur, founder of this network, and just for those who do not know me and who have joined us for the first time. Let me start with our vision. Through Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnership Network, we want to play a leading role in creating an inclusive, collaborative, innovative, and engaging platform for early career researchers and like-targeted stakeholders, including startups and entrepreneurs, supported by experienced senior researchers and business leaders, where everyone can share in their research, innovation, visualization, and enthusiasm in parallel to the network's success. And our fundamental objectives are to create a strong research environment, building to a multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral team of endogenous professionals that would be capable of pursuing and utilizing participatory and integrative approaches in solving public and environmental sustainability problems. And when I say strong research environment, people like who come from business or are individuals, they get stuck here. But I do not mean that strong research means research, but I mean in a scientifically sense, or the ideas that have been tested or observed by others, and they have discovered a few new things, and that is what I mean here. Our priorities are to empower and capacity building. So working with researchers to empower communities and individuals, increase independence and support those who need it. Give researchers and stakeholders the legacy of sustainable practices. Fair and inclusive, improve economic, social, and environmental equality, pursuing development which offers fair distribution and access to good quality life and working conditions. Networking and engagement provide an innovative and global-wide platform to make global sustainable future progress to partnership and effective and well-connected network, transforming traditional societal systems to more sustainable systems. And above all, we want sustainability, that is, co-create sustainable and resilient development pathways to secure sustainable futures for all and everyone. And so our key focus is on mobilization and engagement. Here too, the mobilization and engagement is in a very broad sense. That is, just now we are not able to go out and travel or meet people, but still with this technology, we are able to exchange our ideas, and we are able to engage and mobilize our knowledge. Building a community of practice, create a strong leadership, and produce a critical mass of good practices. And so again, I would like to repeat our three main activities, and these are just the overhead activities, and therefore there are many other activities going on under these headings. So in daily life, I would like you to engage, or daily, not daily life, but daily I would like to engage with UN global goal of month through social media so that we can create an awareness of these. And simultaneously, we can engage with other formal and informal networking events. On a monthly basis, we want to engage with strategic and emerging global debates while also these monthly meetings can serve as a networking and capacity development platforms. And ongoing, when we have some certain projects with specific objectives and to reach out to outreach of a specific group and community, then we would encourage to get together and do such projects. So that is engaging with global issues with target to one or more sustainable development goals and beyond. So our commitment is to investigate what needs to be changed and how it can be changed, to initiate projects important to build sustainable societies, to act as ambassadors of SDGs and contribute to research activities of one or more of SDGs, to engage with various relevant stakeholders, to step up, join forces, and build a stable network, having strong mission and mission-oriented approach, to go beyond and establish concrete examples of co-creation, co-design solutions. So it's a very short update of GSFN. We are definitely producing a whole big report on GSFN 2021, but it's still taking time. We will disseminate by the end of this month. However, I would like to say that considering that the network had just started in January 2021, it is a great accomplishment. All the greater when we count the number of occasions where GSFN participated and delivered impactful outreach activities. Before going to the, I would wish to remind you that there is a TED Talk here, which I have developed. It's 5 minutes. It is just telling about what I described in previous slides, its vision, our commitments, and so on. So if you want to represent any, if you want to share our vision or anything to anyone, then just make use of this TED Talk, which would be immensely impactful to others, and they would be interested in our activities and to join our network, as well as we can show our aim and objectives to them very easily. Also, I would like to invite you to make a short TED Talks of 5 minutes or less on your own activity and making a connections to how our network is and what are you achieving towards network, or how you are contributing to networks, or whatsoever which combines your and the network objectives, then that would be very welcoming to me. Like if you prepare those TED Talks and produce them, I would be very happy to put them on YouTube and our TV channels. So please consider this opportunity to showcase your activities. Secondly, I wish you all to visit at least once our website and see the content and get a feel about it. It is not only increasing our visibility, but also you can come back with the feedback to improve it. And that is what I'm encouraging here. If you wish to write down on these things or on blogs or anything about our network, then that is also welcomed. There are space for your activities. And thirdly, I request you to also visit our GSFN 2021 conference webpage to see the diversity and inclusivity of our network. Again, I am looking forward to your feedback to shape our future programs at various platforms by future programs. And fourthly, I want to recognize and congratulate all those many of our coordinators, either on their own or in a group. They have presented GSFN at several programs worldwide. This has made our network not only visible, but have provided a significant encouragement. And that is showing that such networks are very necessary platforms for global sustainable futures. So the goal of the month from January 2022, advertised like editorial from UN, is end poverty for all people everywhere. I have put a link to this slide, so you will get that later, or you can just Google browse it. You will easily find this, and you will try to understand. And here, poverty must be seen in the broadest sense. That is, in all forms, everywhere. And especially because the poverty impacts on or creates injustice, inequalities, and it impacts on education, social cohesion, health, and well-being. So I would request you to visit and understand this, why it is a goal of the month. And you know, these last 2 years of COVID and other uncertainties have made this worse. Whatever we had achieved in last 10 years has gone down the scale. So I request you to visit that page and try to engage with on the social media, or write a blog, or do some activity around this, any sort of project, research activities to address or contribute to this goal of the month. Finally, I would like to announce that we have 1,250 coordinators in 122 countries. And our followers at various social media channels are also increasing. I'm immensely thankful to Ashish Kelkar, who is keeping the records of our membership network members. So, and he's so up to date and so helpful. So thank you very much here, Ashish. I know that this figure, I have repeatedly presented this figure, and it is slightly old now. We are going to update it, and you will see a lot more figures here at these call outs, and you will see that just within our network, we have tremendous capacity to contribute to various SDGs and main 4 areas such as economy, society, biosphere, and of course, partnerships. And so I invite you all to engage with each other and the external networks to contribute to our common good. Finally, I would also like to announce that I am looking for several support champions here to do various activities. And so maybe like TV champion, survey champion, meetings champion, website champion, social media champions, blog champion, Slack channel champion, YouTube channel champion. If anyone wants to learn, they can take this voluntary position. Please bear in mind, it is not a paid job. And so if you want to engage with and get some skill or get some experience doing this, please get into contact with me, okay? So the agenda for today is, I will now just introduce Sharon Drew Morgan, and she will take 5 minutes to introduce herself. Then we will have Usi Abu Na Mengi, who is going to give a 5-minute talk on business is about people and their planet. And then we will move to the speaker, Marshall Mernell, who is going to speak about mobilizing climate finance through a blended finance structure for developing world nations. And then we have Ollie Brame McIntosh talking about digital platforms for action towards sustainability. Finally, I will just share 1 or 2 upcoming opportunities and we will close. And if time permits and if everyone has still energy, we will have some social networking. So that is today's agenda. And I will welcome Sharon Drew today and I will stop sharing here and I will, just to let you know, Sharon Drew Morgan is an original thinker, inventor, and NY Times best-selling author of 9 books. She develops unique systemic brain change models and skill sets that businesses use to promote servant leadership and congruent change management and decision-making. Sharon Drew's latest book is What? Did You Really Say What I Think I Heard? And so I will now give the floor to her.
Hi, everyone. It's 6 o'clock in the morning here. I just want you to know that. I live on the west coast of the States and I live on a houseboat. So it's very dark outside, just letting you know, because it's 6:30 in the morning. And I didn't know I was giving a 5-minute presentation. So since I was a child, I saw the world differently than everybody. And I realized early on that I couldn't change my behaviors just because I wanted to change my behaviors. And I realized that behavior change had to come from my brain. So I began a long time ago, before there was even data, learning about how decisions get made in the brain and how change happens and how people change. And there wasn't a lot of data, so I began making stuff up. Except I can sort of see brain circuits and I can hear systems. I listen in systems, actually. And I've spent my life creating models to help change occur. And my whole life has been about the how. Most people do it from a behavior, but you can't change a behavior by trying to change a behavior, which is one of the problems the climate change and sustainability has. We're trying to get people to change their behaviors by giving them good research and good data, but that doesn't happen. So action comes from real brain change and new circuitry in the brain. So what I bring to the party, I hope, is systemic brain change. I've invented a new form of question that people can use to help others make real change. And I'm going to be presenting 4 programs about a new form of question to help people change and make decisions and take action, and a way to interview people so that they'll take action. And listening, my last book was Listening Without Bias, and then dialoguing and interviewing for change. So hopefully I'll bring some skills that everybody can use while they're doing their work to make sure people get on board, take one little step and one little step and one little step, because if millions of people take one little step, we're in a lot better shape than we're in now. So I'm here to serve. I'm here to offer anything I can do to help us all live a happy, sustainable, healthy, safe life. So I'm here to help anybody do anything at the how level. I'm the how queen, okay? So I'm glad to join everybody, and if there's any way I can serve you, I'd be delighted.
Thank you very much, Sharon Drew. We are very, very pleased to have you, and we are looking forward to your future programs. Thank you very much. So there is a slight change in the order of the speakers. I've got a request from Ollie Briam that he needs to go for another program. And so we will bring him first on the floor, at the floor. So Ollie Briam, please take the floor. Thank you.
Dr. Renuka, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Yeah, sorry for the request to swap there. There was a change to the timetable, so I'm having to do my best to adapt. But it really is a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen. And it would be
Yes,
great
you can share. You can share.
Okay. Can folks see this?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Fantastic. So today I'm going to be talking about digital platforms for sustainability. Very grateful for this opportunity to talk about this. This is something I've been very interested in now for a few years, and have only, even after that period, only some pretty initial musings and findings, and I'm excited to share them with you today. If anything that comes up in this presentation is of interest, hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers, but please do reach out. At the end of the presentation will be my contact details. I'm always very, very happy to open up new dialogues on this subject. So, some context. I mean, I will spare you a rehearsal of the challenges, the risks, the crises facing the world today. Our organizer, Dr. Renuka, has already alluded to some of them, but I will also trust that many of us are here because we know intellectually or spiritually or both that we're also facing a century of really spectacular opportunity to remediate some of these planetary injustices and to move forward together. So it's really on that basis that I'd like to begin, rather than detailing in too much detail the nature of the challenges itself, given that we probably are roughly on the same page about just how much work there is to do. So let's begin. There we are. So when we tend to think about the most critical concrete changes that need to happen to transition society, when we talk about sustainability classically, we're often talking about treaties, about policies, about investments. And it'll be no surprise that those three issues, as an example, all belong to the domain of either markets and states. And my initial question here was, what about life beyond the institution? So the potential for civil society actors to contribute to what we talk about when we're typically talking about sustainability has been repeatedly found to be very significant. Some of the references in blue here, I think, are a great place to start. But that civil society angle has been also found to be very widely overlooked and underutilized compared to the market, compared to the state. Studies focused on my hometown in London, for instance, have found that this is largely true, right? Finding sustainability measures typically implemented in the city are often very, very much beholden to the logic of the market and the logic of the state. They can be top-down, they can be elitist, even anti-democratic, and that these interventions disproportionately outweigh the more redistributive or participatory transition efforts of civil society. While places like London and many places around the world can perform relatively well in terms of sustainability overall, the power afforded to communities, to civil society, to NGOs, to citizens and their networks, the people who operate outside or at least on the fringes of states and on the fringes of markets, tends to be undermined, sometimes even actively, by firms and government agencies. Chappie and Newman produced a very, very interesting report on this in the UK context. Moreover, much of the social and spatial infrastructure that traditionally enables civil society, spaces, often again at the fringes of cities, for instance, has reportedly been taken or co-opted by competing interests, or otherwise simply just neglected and left disintegrating as a result. So what we put the focus on states, we put the focus on markets and sustainability. There is this huge shadow where a lot of work is left to be done. But it's not all bad. Troncoso and Utritel, two researchers based in Spain, have observed that affinity-based networks and communities worldwide I'm going to have to rearrange my screen here because it's a little, there we go, are increasingly capable of taking matters into their own hands and making very innovative contributions to the transition processes, often using peer-to-peer dynamics and building commons. So despite the neglect—
Can I stop here, Ollie? Are you
Please do.
changing your slides?
No, I'm not. This is just a one slide. I'm just—
Oh, okay,
just
that's
trying to
fine
present
then. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Do let me know if there's any lag, or sometimes that can be the case. Thank you, Veronique.
No, it looks perfect, please. And you are muted, sorry.
Sorry, I just muted myself. So there's a lot of research suggesting that despite this preferential treatment that markets and states get in the domain of sustainability, that seems to be shifting in the sense that there are these affinity-based networks and communities that are taking matters into their own hands. And there is a lot of evidence of this pushback against that preferential treatment that markets and states get. But there are several factors that seem to inhibit the efficacy of civil society to show up alongside markets and states. There have been a few attempts to systematically understand these factors, fewer still to consider how they might be overcome. And that's really the sort of the tone I'd like to set for this talk today. So very briefly, I'd like to zoom out a second. What are we talking about? My focus academically has been sustainable urban development, but what does that really mean? Well, sustainable urban development are three very, very important words, perhaps some of the most important words of the century, and yet they very rarely get unpacked in detail. My undergraduate degree is in linguistics, and so I'm always very interested in what the words we say mean and how cooperative our use of those words is, how aligned our implied meanings are. So let's look at sustainability. Now, problemized interpretations on the left here in this column, you can see this is kind of often where the mainstream tends to be at when we're thinking about each of these words. There can be a co-option of sustainability into mechanistic and extractive paradigms. The social aspects of sustainability, the transformative aspects, can often be widely overlooked. So instead, I prefer to focus on the regenerative approaches to the word sustainable, looking at complex transition processes, being very attentive to interaction, attentive to participation, attentive to equity. So we move to the question of the urban. We typically look at cities as a bounded thing, as if they exist in isolation of everything surrounding them. We tend to be not as critical as we could be of some of the delocalizing effects of globalization, which are really changed the nature of a city. And the endogenous dynamics of a city, in terms of what happens within as opposed to between, tend to get undermined by a lot of classical urban development paradigms. So instead, maybe we can see cities at the confluence of flows and metabolisms of capital. The idea that London finishes, some 20 miles from the center of London is pretty easily disproved when you find that, the Indian restaurant, which is, staffed by Italian immigrants and dined in by Canadian tourists, London stops being such a bounded concept. But we have to balance these two factors when we look at the urban, right? We have the endogenous, what is within, and we can look at things like new municipalism as really powerful frames to shake up how we look at cities. But we also have this exogenous dimension that cities are in this web globally. How do we do that? The globalist agenda has been criticized, and the cosmo-local agenda seems to be coming up as a way to deal with that. Design global, manufacture local is its tagline. So we've got this idea of a preferred sustainability, a preferred notion of the city. What about a preferred notion of development? Well, typically development is caught up in quite capitalistic notions of infinite and endless growth. There is a logic of quite centralized control. Someone at the top tends to decide what development is, what it looks like, when it starts and when it ends. And it tends to be mediated mostly by, you guessed it, markets and states. And the commons, or the domain of civil society at least, is enclosed in the process. So what would it look like to see the development, when we talk about sustainable urban development, as based on a political economy of post-growth, rather than, or at least growth agnosticism, based on commoning, which is to say mediated mostly by civil society. That's not to say markets and states disappear entirely, of course, but that we just try and rebalance that triangle. And maybe even looking, for those interested in this theme, towards a post-cybernetics, where we can understand the role of emergent planning in development too. A new book by Michelle Bowens and a bunch of other researchers is looking specifically at this issue. Always more than happy to go into some of the links here as well. But I wanted to just frame this here because this right-hand column, really, the preferred interpretations, is what I'm going to talk about when I talk about the transformation space. So maybe I just invite you to, when we talk about sustainable urban development, that's probably going to trigger a lot of previous meanings and stories in our own heads. And I just invite you to lightly leave them at the door here. And as we go in, just think about these preferred interpretations as what could, in fact, characterize classical sustainable urban development agendas. Now, there's an issue with this transformation space, though, even in the preferred interpretations there. And I'm going to read this quote from a group called Control Shift. And I think they name the problem that is really inhibiting the efficacy of even the most aligned transformation actors that are really, really in that right-hand column. They say, we have the research and policy proposals, campaigns and participatory processes to support new forms of social innovation. But we struggle to work across identities of class, color, culture, nationality, gender, politics, and religion, even when we share values and aspirations for the future. We lack a voice and coordination, and our work remains fragmented and siloed. Fundamentally, they conclude that we have yet to demonstrate that we can bring together the different components we are each engaged in to create an alternative system. I think what this does so well at highlighting is the fact that there is no shortage of assets. There is really an abundance of system conditions that would suggest that we're really ripe to make a pretty lasting and deep transition or transformation towards sustainable development. And yet something keeps getting in the way. And this dark matter of transformation is where I see the digital realm being particularly useful. So if we can suggest then that we could do so much better, I want to ask why. My master's thesis 2 years ago, or last year, in fact, was 2 years ago now, it's 2022, or roughly at least, was focused on barriers to synergy, looking at, okay, if we have this transformation space of lots of actors very committed to to sustainability, to sustainable development, what seems to be getting in the way? And I came up with a few, I think, what really are those barriers to the efficacy of that transformation space currently. And I gave them a few names and I gave them a few little myths that I'm going to read out here for you. So first up is the atomization of agency. We can think of that as the myth of all of our isolated interventions will aggregate just fine. Right? So I'm going to do this, and maybe that person over there is going to do that. And yeah, over time, you just add them all together and they will aggregate just fine. And there are some issues with this. Second up, there's the compartmentalization of scope, which is to say that if I work on agriculture and you work on health, and we really, really see the scope of our work as strongly limited to that compartment of the wider issue, despite the deep intermingling of all the issues that we are separately addressing, then the more networked, the more established regime of value, the more established paradigm in which all of those little innovations are embedded is always going to be able to eat them up, to co-opt them. So we've got a very, very small scope problem going on. There's also the issue of egoic desire and private satisfactions. We can call this, I want to be the one who did the thing. A little bit of savior complexes in all of us. And sometimes it can be a really good friend. But when you scale those patterns up without strategic intervention, it's a big barrier to synergy. We also have this question of discursive dissonance, discursive resonance is the opposite. Discursive dissonance. So and I get this a lot. So, week after week, I see this very same issue where someone says, well, I'm working on regeneration, not sustainability, or I'm interested in regeneration, not sustainability. Now, of course, the differences between those terms, we could have a whole hour-long discussion on. And they're very important. And there probably is a shift in the discourse, moving away from sustainability and towards a regenerative version of sustainability. But a lot of the time, the values and the meaning underlying those words are very, very aligned, or at least much more aligned than the difference in word alone would suggest. So using different language, using different discourses, we put very, very high walls between what would otherwise be fairly synergistic components of change. So just language can have a huge effect, another barrier to synergy. Another one is probabilistic anticipatory assumptions. This notion of anticipation comes from the work of Riel Miller at UNESCO. And he really tries to understand how, when we engage in change, we are operationalizing certain assumptions about the future, certain visions of the future. And the nature of those visions informs the nature of the change we try and do. So if we've got this story of, I'm going to do my bit to realize our predetermined fate, well, probably everything seems to be going in this direction, and I'm just going to chip into it. What we can actually end up doing is eroding the possibility space in favor of probability. Now, I don't want to go into this too much because the anticipatory assumptions literature is very deep and very philosophical, but I think there's something very interesting in this, which is that the visions of the future basically can actually, when they're too hegemonic, can really shut out a lot of the pathways that we might otherwise have open to us. There's operational conformity too. I'm sure we're all familiar with this in some way. If we work in organizations or institutions, sometimes we want to push back and say, well, there's probably a better way of doing this, but the institution or the organization either silently or loudly seems to say, no, that's not allowed. If it doesn't look familiar, you're doing it wrong. That we have a way of doing things, and if you're not doing that, you don't get it, and you can't play with us. So people really at the fringes of innovation can really tend to find those really constraining factors. Another one is pseudo scarcity. There's only much support to go around. Narratives of the economy can actually seem to reduce the amount of support there is, rather than seeing them from an abundance framing, which might otherwise suggest that actually sustainability actors can really access a pretty abundant range of support and resources if there is a different infrastructure of support and resource delivery. The last two here, competitive interests. We deserve the support more than they do. We're better than them. We're more interesting than them. We've been working harder than them. And often that can come from a very, very genuine and earnest place where people have committed so much to the change initiative they're working on in sustainability that they see the newcomer and they can, rather than be delighted that the space seems to be getting bigger and more populous, they are scared somehow. Who are these folks? Are they going to take some of those pseudo scarce resources away from us? And what can we do to make sure they don't? So that desire for cooperation that might otherwise be there is actually suppressed in the interest of competition. And finally, this one I think is very, very interesting, mediascape obscurity. How many times have I been approached by initiatives in the sustainability space who are announcing to me in some of the consulting work I've done that we're the ones doing this. And because some of my privileged position, having worked with a lot of these groups, I can very assuredly tell them, you're not. There are many, many out there. But people will say, well, I Googled it. It turns out we're the only ones doing this stuff. Because we don't really have very good systems to increase visibility of what's actually going on in the transformation space. It can be very easy to draw the conclusion that you're the only one doing it anyway. It's a really tricky problem to solve, but we'll try and get onto that later as well. So here, I hope what we've laid out is a sense of the barriers to synergy. This, of course, all invites the question, well, what's going to help us overcome them? Now, networks are the classical answer here. Maybe some of you have already been thinking about that term as we've been looking at these barriers. Ron Felt here in the top right, you can see he's a sort of a historian of sorts who has kind of announced that we are in the network era. We were once in tribes, then we were in institutions, then we were in markets. And he predicted in the late 90s that we would start coming into this network era. And he made a lot of very, very prescient predictions really about what kind of society was taking shape, including its dark side here. You'll see the dark side here is deception. Deception as the risk of the network society. I think we're all very, very familiar with now. And it's a really powerful point of view to say that maybe networks can be the thing that helps us get over these humps. But of course, we're already in networks. We live in networks. Networks are at the base of life. A study by a guy called Barry Wellman in Toronto, where he looked at just the relationships between 800 random adults, right? Not a very well networked group of sustainability initiatives, just normal people getting on with their lives. And he found that the concatenation of networks helps to organize social systems. Considered from the standpoint of the system, rather than that of the individual, it is the compounding of links and networks at many levels, which allocates resources and juxtaposes alliance of similar interests. So a network of networks connects individuals, clusters, and collectivities in complex ways. Now, whilst once upon a time, this would have been a pretty radical thing to put emphasis on, it kind of feels obvious in an era where you can meet someone in a bar and pretty much guarantee you'll find them on social media. So this raises the question, okay, maybe networks could really help with these barriers to synergy in sustainability, but if we're already living and acting in them, surely networking alone is not enough, because otherwise we would have already overcome them. So networks are great. They're a really great start. And there's a lot of very interesting work pointing to the value of sustainability networks. We're in one currently in this room. They're beautiful things and they are really proliferating right now, which is fantastic. But sometimes they need other stuff. There's a special secret sauce that helps networks really overcome those barriers. Enter the digital question. Indeed, enter the internet itself. I always find this particularly interesting when we're in a room and we're talking about the internet, and yet that room is on the internet. It's very layered and meta. So I just want to raise our attention to the fact that what I'm about to talk about, we're kind of living in. It's a bit matrixy, isn't it? But the idea that if we can, as you'll see my train of thought here, from networks, from synergy and networks, now if we bring in the aspect of the internet, try and drop into how it can actually feel to be in this room with someone. I heard at the beginning there was someone from Chad, someone from India. We represent probably 3, 4, 5 even continents in a room of 35 people. That alone, I think, can when we sometimes reappraise the obvious fact that we're all living on the internet, can really light up new pathways for looking at networks and synergy. So platforms, possibly the term of the decade. It's a pretty complicated term though, and it's a pretty controversial one even. The word platform has taken on myriad metaphorical meanings, literally for centuries as well, far from its very literal connotation as just a flat surface on which something else can stand, an architectural metaphor, if you like. Today, it's especially common as a description of businesses and technologies, which in many cases have very little to do with one another. And so as a result, it's kind of often been argued that the term is overused, and it's taken on a kind of platitudinous quality that doesn't really mean anything. And so because of that, it kind of be slippery and political and even dangerous sometimes. But it does usefully encapsulate some of the practices which are the focus of my inquiry generally and today's talk. So defined in keeping with the work of Simone Cicero, or Cicero, an Italian business studies scholar and consultant, he has come up with what he and his colleagues call platform ecosystem thinking, or PET. And they call a platform very simply a strategy to mobilize and help an ecosystem produce shared value and express its potential. Now, that's kind of what's missing, not only in the transformation space, but even in the networked bits of the transformation space. So what would it look like to take all of these networks and create platforms? That's a question that a lot of people have asked. Now, just to add some more detail here, this approach stipulates that the platform strategies typically comprise a connective or aggregative tool and an accompanying set of conventions, which together facilitate multi-sided peer-to-peer connections and transactions, often between peer producers and peer consumers. That's something, right? So this question of the internet and platforms coming in to potentially be a real boon for sustainability is not a rare one. This is from the Sustainability in the Digital Age. This is a sort of subset of what's called the Montreal Declaration, which is produced by a bunch of scholars working at the intersection of sustainability and digital innovation. They see 4 digital disruptors that are really going to be critical to doing what we're doing better in the transformation space. And one of them, you'll notice, is mass collaboration. I'm just going to read what they describe mass collaboration as, because they're talking about in the context of platforms. And I think this framing is particularly helpful. So the social web, the ubiquity of smartphones, the emergence of decentralized digital ledgers are enabling people to connect and collaborate like never before. Massive collaboration enabled by digital technology has given rise to new forms of business around co-production and shared resources, new forms of social movements driven by online communities, and new forms of governance too. So platforming transformation then. I think we found the answer. Hurrah, we have overcome the barriers to synergy. Welcome to a bold new age of efficacy in transformation. let's get busy making a transformation platform. Let's take existing networks and have them use the platform, and then let's make new networks that are native to the platform. We fix the problem, right? Well, it turns out that everyone said that at the same time when realizing that platforms and the internet could be a boon for sustainability. And so we now have a new problem. There's been a boom in what we call transformation platforms, transition platforms. There are many different terms for it spilling about that. The field is very poorly consolidated at the moment, which I think is why it's so exciting. It's very, very fresh insights, a lot of them coming out really only in the last year or so. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I'm very briefly going to stop share and try and share another part of the screen, which is just show you a little bit of this boom. Can everyone see? Oh, no, wrong one. There we go. Is that right? Can you see this?
Yes, we can see.
Transformation platforms?
Yes, we can see.
Lovely. So there are over 400 in this list that I've been mapping for about 18 months. Some of them are ported in from other lists. Some of them I've worked with some researchers with me, and a lot of them are just picking up normally about one a day, really. I just want to scroll through the list. I don't know, sometimes these screen shares can be a bit laggy, but just to give you an impression of just how much is going on in this space now. There are hundreds and hundreds of platforms. They have sometimes a thematic focus in the transformation space. Sometimes they have a geographical focus in the transformation space. Sometimes they are focused on specific design parameters or design values. You'll see one here. Let's see, Women's International League of Peace. There's going to be a focus on gender issues for sure there. Chemin de la Transition is a French platform, so sometimes they're language focused. Ting, for instance, has a focus on using games in the process, and I'm just picking 3 that I can see on this last screen here, but the point is there's a lot of them, really a lot. And let's go back into here. So, there we are. Can we see this again?
Yes.
Thank you, Renuka. Sorry, I can't see anyone's faces if anyone is giving thumbs up. So this boom, it's a bit of an issue now, because we have so many of these spaces that trying to figure out where to do this good platforming of transformation to try and overcome these barriers of synergy in the space has become very cluttered, very chaotic, very poorly coordinated, which, funnily enough, you may recognize from some of the problems that we initially faced looking at the initiatives themselves. Now they've been networked, now those networks have been platformed. We thought we solved the problem, but there are now so many platforms that it's the same old synergy problem rearing its head. Now, I've been working with a group of academics from Germany, from the UK, from Canada, and the US on a project where we're soon to publish. We have some conference proceedings coming out in Data and Policy from Cambridge University Press, hopefully in the coming months. We looked at just a very small set of that 400. We chose 42 or 41, I think. I've removed the column with the numbers in, but I think it was 41 or 42 of them. And we tried to see what's going on with here, produce a descriptive analysis of all of these platforms that are oriented towards sustainability or transformation of some description. Not limited to my columns on the right of my preferred interpretations. Some of them are slightly more aligned to the more problematic interpretations or problematizable interpretations, but all in the sustainability / regeneration / in that loose space there. We found signs of the boom in this 42. This graph shows here the year of foundation of some of the platforms. We didn't put any focus on selecting platforms that were created recently. We tried to get a representative set, and we can see that a lot of them are coming up recently. This sort of peak from say 2014 onwards, we think probably correlates with the time that this sort of thing would have been booming in other sectors. It really makes sense to see it here as well. 41, there it is. Sorry, n equals 41. There are 41 platforms we were looking at. I'm going to show you some other descriptions of just this small set of the platforms in the sustainability space. You can see the users, big range. Some of them have, 8 of them had just under 100, but also 8 of them had over 10,000 users. So they're relatively popular. Looking at the SDGs that they address, we use that as one sort of analytical heuristic. A lot of focus on energy, on cities, on climate, and on partnership, not so much focused, say, relatively speaking, on gender or on oceans. And that's reflecting that thematic bias that some of them have, I mentioned earlier. They're created not always by civil society. About a third of them are created by civil society. Lots of them are created by self-contained independent groups, but that aren't necessarily affiliated to any explicitly civil society-oriented founder. But a lot of them are also made by government bodies, even, that are sensing the opportunity to try and get over these barriers to synergy. But there is an issue with this, and I want to just go into a discussion phase. I guess that I'm coming up maybe about 15 minutes left. I don't know. I would love to leave some time for questions. But I can't see you, Renuka, right now. But please do shout and scream at me if I'm going over time. There's some issues I'd like to address here. This is from 2006, this first quote, which I think is a testament to how long we've been thinking and observing this issue. It's what he calls the pseudo-government of social software. Right? All of these platforms, we consider them as social software. When one designs social software, one is forced to make pseudo-governmental decisions about how the contained ecosystem will behave. These rules create and inform the structural aspects of the ecosystem, causing participants in the ecosystem to behave in a specific way. So just like architects and urbanists shaped the reality of billions of lives by designing the cities we live in, as a lot of our lives moves to the internet, the designers of social software have that same power. It is a pseudo-government. So it's this power of how we're designing these platforms, which, as we've seen, are proliferating, is critical. But the Armillaria Collective, who are party to the Collaborative Technology Alliance that I do some work for, a disclaimer there of some bias, but it's really fantastic work. And some of the research has pointed to trying to, what are those pseudo-governmental decisions? Where are they coming from? What are they inspired by? And they say that many of these new platforms are being informed by the same design logic that has also defined the creation of many of the most popular and most extractive technology companies of our time. And as a result, the social change industry, which I think we can loosely equate with the sustainability space, at least for argument's sake here, has inadvertently proliferated a variety of technologies for good. You've seen a snapshot of some of the ones in the more platform space of those technologies that often exacerbate the social challenges they seek to address by extracting valuable information from communities and trapping this value in silos in an ever-growing collection of proprietary platforms. So I'm not the only one that thinks this, at least, which is reassuring. But this question of often exacerbating the social challenges, it feels kind of awkward, because here we have a lot of, again, well-intentioned, well-meaning, very earnest creators of spaces and tools in order to really get over those barriers to synergy, whether it's in networks or in unnetworked or in unexplicitly unnetworked transformation spaces. And yet they may actually be doing some damage. There probably is a lot of good that's happening, and there is also nice evidence to suggest that some of the partnerships that are coming out of these platforms are great. The UNDISA has got an interesting set of studies on this. But there is a shadow, there's a dark side. They're exacerbating some of the social challenges. Oh, does someone unmute? Do I need to know something? No, it might have been someone unmuting. Okay. So I'd like to just shift and get a little bit down into the details here. Now, this isn't my study. This is a study from a group called the Impact Finance Network. Now, not only did they do a much broader study, not just of 41, but of 155 platforms, rather than doing descriptive analysis, they really did interviews, and they tried to get into what is wrong with what they're doing right now. And they came up with a few headlines. Data is not shareable. Now, I don't want to stray too far into some of the technical sort of IT language here, so do bear with me. But I think this is really the crux of the matter for the booming platform space. Taxonomies, impact metrics, and meta groupings like the SDGs are inconsistent and even incoherent sometimes. So the way that data exists about sustainability action in these platforms is really messy. It's really, really, really messy. Everyone's got their own way of doing it. We have this taxonomy, we use these metrics, we have this meta grouping, and there's very, very little coordination between them. Another finding was that platforms are not sufficiently interoperable. Now, an API or an application programming interface, basically a way for two different sort of software to talk to each other. Only 32% of platforms actually had one. So that means that it's a complete black box. Nothing can leave the platform unless you literally go in and copy and paste everything. It's very, very impractical, and most people don't have the technical knowledge to actually access that kind of data. Platforms are not replicable either. They have 47% have custom-built technology, and only 32% have a licensing model. So that means 2/3 of them, even if someone sees the idea and wants to grow it and extend it, you have to have the permission of the person who owns that very, very specific technology. And often, for some of the reasons we looked at before, their technology is proprietary, and they don't have an interest in sharing it. And lastly, the platforms are not actually very viable, financially speaking. 53% can't even cover their operating expenses, and 61.5% are funded by grants. So when those grants dry up, so do the platforms. So these are just some of the issues affecting these platforms. And moving on, I think what we can see then is that barriers to synergy have maybe simply been offset by one unit of abstraction, one fractal jump. So we used to be looking at all these initiatives. Oh, I may have just drawn on the screen there. Oops, didn't know how I did that. Should be fine. We used to look at all these initiatives and see, wow, there's really potential for synergy here. We could be doing this transformation work much better. Let's have platforms. But now we can basically draw the same conclusion. Look at all these platforms. There's real potential for synergy here. We could be doing transformation much better, but how? This is a really interesting, I think, a really interesting challenge, because we seem to have, again, used the same system conditions that created the problem for us in attempting to solve it. So what do we do? Oh, I think there might be someone who's unmuted. I don't know if that's just me hearing that there, but so we could try and again, like, make another thing that brings them all together, another platform of platforms. We could create a platform of platforms. We could make a network of networks of all these networks and just keep moving up in this abstraction layer, a race to the top, if you like. Some of you may be familiar with Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe was the inventor of the Ethernet system, and he basically observed or he tried to point out at least that networks have these, network effects. You know, you add one thing into one new node into the network, and orders of magnitude more, that node's contribution to the network potential is orders of magnitude more than its original number. It's a little bit difficult to. There is a formula that makes it very elegant, but I didn't think to put it in this presentation. But it basically says, you know, adding more stuff to networks makes them exponentially more networked. And so we could say, well, okay, maybe we just need to take platform A and platform B from that list of 41, from that list of 155, even from my list of 433, and bring them all together, make a platform of platforms, and then we'd have a super network effect, right? There'd be loads of stuff going on. But there are issues to this. There are actually now limits to Metcalfe's law that we're finding as we get deeper and deeper into the network era. There are things called Atlee thresholds, which kind of mathematically demonstrate, originally from ecology and now increasingly used in IT, that actually bigger networks aren't necessarily better networks. They're bigger up until a point, and then something starts to happen where that increasing more participants in the network is actually counteracted. But also we have this idea that diversity is resilience. If we had one super network where all the platforms came together, where we were trying to facilitate all of this amazing transformation work, but only in one space, it would be very fragile. Because if that one space then has an issue, everything's gone. And we know this from ecology. A paper published a few years ago called The Return to Information Theory did some of the most important work mathematically proving that there is a payoff between trying to make something perform efficiently. And if you want that, you tend to just have one of them, put all the effort there and drive. But if you're interested in resilience, if that's important in the domain you're talking about, having that kind of monoculture, having only one thing or a few things with all the power or where all the action is going on is a recipe for disaster. We see this in ecosystems, we see this in markets. So finally, small is beautiful sometimes. Humans are pretty good at small groups. And sometimes social interactions get pretty weird when we start going over what's called Dunbar's number sometimes, these sort of natural limits to the social groupings that humans can interact in successfully. So if we take these three principles, that maybe the networked effect has limits, maybe diversity begets resilience, and maybe small is just kind of better anyway, then we don't really want to bring all the platforms into one platform and take those 433 and just kind of somehow smush them all together. That doesn't seem to be a viable solution either. And if that's the case, if we acknowledge the proliferation of platforms as the place of departure, then the need for infrastructure and protocols for information and value to flow across their bounds, across the bounds of those individual 433 platforms, becomes pretty much self-evident. And those flows need to be enabled by design, becoming the parameters of good platform practice. It's a difficult sell because you have to talk to, well, currently at least about 433 platform designers and say, you may be doing it wrong, which is always a difficult conversation to start. But there's a lot that's doing right. And there's a lot of people who are increasingly attentive to this. Interestingly, in the impact finance platform study that I showed previously, they did find that over half of the people they interviewed would be really, really willing to try and design these platforms in completely new ways and be using more APIs, be using more interoperability by design. I'm not an expert in IT. Maybe some of the people joining here today are, so excuse me if I'm bastardizing the language here, but certain APIs, new protocols, meta-ontologies as well, and different frameworks for how we design these platforms, how we design social software in general, could hold the answer. And it's not an answer that means just that mass sort of aggregation, taking all the networks, making them into one, because as we've seen before, that probably wouldn't work. But it could maybe be the sweet spot that we've been looking for, and therefore unleash sustainable development, action for sustainable development, action for transformation in a completely unprecedented way. So, could get a bit technical here, but portability focused interoperability and infrastructure focused interoperability is a kind of one somewhat useful distinction you can make in some of the in the fields of people who are trying to figure out how to make these platforms better, how to use their synergy inducing potential to the fullest. There is, I won't go into detail too much here, but I'd be really happy to take questions on some of these models that we're seeing pop up. I'm involved in 2 or 3 of them here, some more centrally, some just trying to be a bystander and be of service to what is wanting to emerge. But there is progress, is basically the point here. And what we might be seeing, if we look at the model of panarchy, again, referring back to ecology, is that systems, ecosystems, markets, platform landscapes even, can tend to go through these 4 phases, looping between them, where it's really a factor of how much potential there is in the system and how connected there are in the system. So it might be the case that if we're seeing this boom of platforms, and we had some issues with that boom, but now we're seeing the emergence of a few interoperability protocols to fix it, maybe we're kind of rounding the bend of reorganization, and we're going to really enter into a whole new paradigm of how technology serves sustainability. This could be really quite fundamental, and I'm increasingly convinced that we are getting ever closer to a new loop in this sort of panarchical framing. So one little micro focus here, very briefly, before I end on an approach. I think there may even be some people in the room that I invited, some colleagues of mine who are working on this with me. The idea here, and again, I don't want to be too technical, but just bear with me. The idea here is to create a common schema for the profile data of users for a trial set of transformation-oriented platforms to enable them to connect and coordinate with one another across the bounds of each platform. Now, that's a pretty dense sentence right there, and you're completely forgiven if it means nothing to you. I myself am only learning how to keep up with these very, very technical conversations that my beloved peers in the sector are increasingly having. The point is that if you have platform A, and maybe there's an NGO that uses the platform, and your neighbor up the street uses that platform, and because they're both on the same platform, your neighbor and that NGO, they can do work together, they can coordinate, they can cooperate, they can collaborate, they can realize the potential for synergy. But if there's someone that could really, really participate in what they're doing, that thinks, hey, this is great, I'm actually also your neighbor, I just live up the street by one, you don't really know me very well, but I would really love to be involved in what you're doing here on platform A. They're never going to find each other because of those pseudo-governmental decisions, which put big walls between those platforms. But if the way that NGO A and neighbor A, if the way that their information is stored in that platform is kind of universal or common, then there's a way for someone in platform B to find them regardless. And that could be a real boon for interoperability. And we could start to see some of the platforms in this space be able to share and have flows like a really thriving ecosystem and be able to serve the promise of sustainability, the promise of transformation in a much more powerful way. So this is just one, again, very technical deep dive into, well, not deep dive, really a shallow dive into one potential solution. There are many more. There are many people working on this now. And as I say, I think what we're seeing is the consolidation of a few of these attempts to fix these problems really being brought to bear on that boom of platforms. And who knows, perhaps a boom in sustainability action from civil society will result. That is all. Sorry for any, I think, a little time maybe delay there in terms of encroaching into some question and answer time. My website is down at the moment, but feel free to send me an email, hello@ollie.eco. You can reach me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to schedule chats with people that are more, that are willing to try and go into some of this stuff. But for me, for now, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to Renuka and to the network for this fantastic series of seminars. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting. And I think it is a very new topic to me, actually. So very interesting. Anyone have questions? Many have posted their opinions here, and so it would be probably good for you to go through the chat. But if there are any questions, then you can ask him now because he wants to leave, I think, for another program. And I have seen Peter raising his hand. So Peter, you're welcome to ask questions.
Thank you. A wonderful presentation, Oliver. Very interesting collection of work and resources and approaches. A lot of that feels familiar and resonates in some of my prior work. My question really is sort of like thinking about your last statement about this potentially being a boon for interoperability. And that sort of was the crux of it, sort of where I felt it not inside myself as a sustainable approach, but one that the technology has once again kind of dictated the next step. And then, noticing sort of like, well, yeah, if we had all the data that never quite captured, it's already problematic to try to reduce the complexity of the living vitality of our relationships in the world into metrics and these reductions. So, I'm kind of curious about that as a potential danger, as you pointed out in your initial slides, or that reflective nature of how we interpret what's happening. And I guess another part of that would be sort of in how is this rooted in the individual, not just sort of towards externalized action, but is there something about internalized reflection or action that is clear in this line of inquiry? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, great questions. I completely agree. I think a lot of the people working in the space that asks, hey, maybe we could use technology for sustainability are often beholden to this kind of technological solutionism where, tech is great, so that must be the answer, right? I think interoperability, I put the focus here on some technological interoperability, but I think perhaps even, and it's harder to pin down, But I think perhaps even the most important interoperability work has nothing to do with technology at all, but allows people to interoperate in terms of, you know, what I mentioned before about discursive resonance or discursive dissonance, the way we talk to each other, the way we show up in spaces, how ready we are to leave our flags and our egos at the door when we come into collaborative environments. All of those questions seem to be possibly more important than the technology stuff. I think they go hand in hand. And I think increasingly, as we see the potential for technology to really enable collaboration, people can step into more collaborative ways of being. But I mean, drawing then on the second part of your question, I think those barriers to synergy, much like Donella Meadows said as she rearranged her places to intervene in a system and reprioritizing mindsets as among the most important, they happen within us. And so all of this outer transformation is kind of intertwined in and somewhat dependent on processes of inner transformation, which, you know, remain beyond the scope of most academic researchers in sustainability, which I think is maybe a critical flaw of the field. The sustainable development goals have recently been answered by a team led by Thomas Björkman with the inner development goals, you know, which really asks, how do we collaborate and how do we make sure we try and collaborate better? So I think if we can combine, you know, the tech that's being used in sustainability with an increasing wave of people getting, you know, better at talking to each other, better at collaborating with each other, then I think that would feel like a recipe for success. But without that social work, that cultural work that happens far away from technology, then this tech, I completely agree, it's probably not much of much use. Sharon.
Yes, Sharon, please.
Actually, my name is Sharon Drew.
Sharon Drew.
It's
Sharon
gotta
Drew,
be
my
Sharon
apologies.
Drew, please. So that's what I address, the personal and the interaction and the how of connecting people. I sent you my email address because we can talk. One of the problems with getting people to collaborate and getting the platforms to work together is getting the people that created them to agree to work with other people, which is a whole nother issue. And you're right, sometimes it is ego, and sometimes it's ownership, and sometimes it's people afraid to give their stuff away that they'll lose control. A lot of it's control and fear, but I can help with that, because when you're coming at it from chunking up to higher beliefs and values, and I've invented models that help people connect deeply from their own values. Without information, one of the problems, I'm going to say something that's probably a little odd to some, and I'm happy to discuss, but giving people good information doesn't help them change their minds. It doesn't help them make a different decision because of the way brains work. And I've overcome that. So I'm really happy to help, and I sent you my email address.
Yeah, Sharon Drew, I'm so grateful you're shining a light on this, and I now in retrospect feel like it deserves a place in these kind of presentations. Really, it's so easy to just sort of focus on the technical aspects, but I think this you know, values-based dialogue. I'm so interested in your expertise and experience in helping people agree to work together, because you know, already in some of the experiments we're seeing with the Collaborative Technology Alliance, you get a bunch of people who are like so in theory ready to work together, and a lot of their kind of values, not just on the surface, but I think, you know, really held down, are so pro cooperation. And yet something happens as that conversation begins. It's like, things can fall apart. And I think that control and fear that you spoke to it's part of this dark matter. So I think any of the work that you're working on, I'm sure there's a whole ecosystem of work in this space, but I think it's got to have, you know, a front row seat or a seat at the table, really, when we're talking about how to.
Actually, the material that I've developed, I've trained very large numbers of people in some business fields, but there really isn't any work done. And a lot of people, especially in America, think I'm a bit eccentric for even thinking this is possible, but I've actually developed models. So again, I'm here. I'm happy to help.
Thank you. It'd be great to chat. And sorry as well, so Peter, I didn't actually ask if that had addressed your answer as well at the beginning there, but I hope it does. Feel free to elaborate. Did anyone else also have any questions? I can only see half of the screen at the moment, so it might be Renuka.
Yes, there is Robert Scram. Yes, Rob, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just remove my hand. Thanks, Oliver. That was an impressive presentation. And it's not really a question, but I want to encourage you with continuing your work. I think making all these energies, as you described them, on these different platforms, this huge, humongous network of networks, is very crucial, because when we see what's out there, then we can become aware what the potential actually is. And I wouldn't call it like a first step, because there are many, many steps have been before us. And hopefully many, many steps will come in the near future. But I think once we see an overall picture, and once we can categorize them, make them visible in all kinds of different formats, like a Wheel of Synergy or a World Mandela, and then people can hopefully start seeing the potential and acknowledging also, and find themselves where their interest and passion is. So I want to thank you very much for your great work, and for everyone that gave you the opportunity to present it today.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you. We will now move to another presentation, and I will invite yes, I will invite Usi Abu Mnamengi to present his talk. Hello, are you there, Usi? Just let me check through the participants list. No, I think we have missed him. So we will go to the next presentation. And so we don't have Usi, and now we have Marshall Marmel, and he's going to present mobilizing climate finance through a blended finance structure for developing world nations. And he's the co-founder, Chief Executive Management at Advanced Resilient Technology Limited. So I welcome Marshall to take the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and I'm going to share the slides for Marshall.
Thank you. While we're waiting for the slides to come up, I just want to make a few comments. The previous speaker brought up a lot of information that we're all absorbing, and I noticed that Sharon Drew Morgan was able to take that information, and she is able to give us some opportunities to look at that information along with the previous speaker. One of the things that he brought up was the thematic focus impact finance platforms, which is related to what I'm going to be talking about today. And he brought up the issue that a lot of the taxonomies that are out there, taxonomies by definition are rules of the road created by various players, both governments, companies, and institutions and organizations. What we've come up with is a method post COP26 of mobilizing climate finance. And it's through a blended finance structure for developing world nations, specifically for them. And the reason we're going to be talking about developing world nations as opposed to the United States or the EU or other large world nations is because developing world nations are in a kind of a quandary of how to move forward to deal with the climate crisis that we're all beset with. And though they only contribute a very small portion, they are actually being driven to a process where they are unfairly, in my opinion, being affected by the larger countries of the world, such as China, the United States, and the EU, with the mobilization of modern technology over the past 100 years. So if you could go to the next slide. So the method that we're talking about is that gives third world countries and developing technologies and enterprises a level playing field, or at least we believe that could issue a level playing field, is what is known as a pre-issuance credit enhancement guarantee. Up until COP26, or actually up until March of 2020, the beginning of the lockdown of the pandemic, mostly worldwide, there were only actually what we might call post-issuance credit enhancement guarantees for people who issue bonds, climate bonds in specific, or green bonds, as the category is known, to be able to acquire funds to address climate issues from a financial point of view, either with technology or methodologies. And what credit enhancement does is, if you were to issue a bond as a municipality or a corporation, you might get the people who are bringing the bond to market, which are generally speaking financial institutions such as investment banks on various exchanges. They would create a risk mitigated approach to enhancing the fact that if the bondholders purchase the bond and the bond issuer, for whatever reason, is unable to pay back the bond, and this typically pre-pandemic was municipalities, there was like an insurance policy to be able to enhance the guarantee for the bondholders. What occurred after the beginning of the development of the crash of the economy in March of 2020 worldwide, and the pandemic, which helped cause that, a need was created for what happens, how do we address the timeline of the climate crisis? And it's definitely tied into the issue of what's going on today with the financing of being able to address the climate crisis. And so there are three issues in credit enhancement where are called pre-issuance credit enhancement guarantees. One is pioneering the blended finance investment. And that blended finance investment, which existed pre March of 2020, has begun to change, and it provides developing world countries the opportunity to finance what are known as shovel-ready private-public partnerships and projects. So to give you an example, if a country has waste management issues, in other words, it has landfills that are filling up and toxifying the environment for the population in that country, or it is creating greenhouse gas emissions out of that landfill, or it is destroying the water resource. Most water, I don't know if people realize this, most clean water, potable water, is in aquifers, not on surface areas. Then if you have a project that is shovel ready to address those issues in the developing world, and you're a private enterprise, you generally need to join forces with the government, either the local government in that area, or the federal government or the national government. The second point is pre-issue credit enhancement guarantees. We have found they leverage a 10x, in other words, 10 times the value when used to back what the EU has issued as climate bonds, fitting the decarbonization potential of the climate bond initiative taxonomies. And as our previous speaker spoke out about the fact that there are different taxonomies and different rules of the road. And this is a clear example of what he was talking about. There is the Climate Bond Initiative is a regulator in the EU that issues climate bonds and they are in the category known as green bonds. And green bonds are confusing by their very definition, because green bonds are bonds that supposedly address the climate crisis. And there is a specific market known as a green bond. So you could actually go out and purchase a green bond as opposed to a climate bond, or as opposed to a social responsibility bond, or as opposed to an ESG bond, and other bonds that fit into the category known as green bonds. So it can be somewhat confusing. The third element is innovative credit enhanced solutions offer the key to mobilizing the $130 trillion in private capital earmarked to avert the existential threat of the climate change. And the canary in the coal mine for the climate change, does anybody know what that is? I'm not going to actually literally ask that question. I'll just tell you what it is. It is the melting of the glaciers around the world. Specifically, the canary in the coal mine is the Thwaites Glacier, which is one of the barrier glaciers to the South Pole. And there's a climate clock in New York City at Union Square, which is essentially 14th Street, not the one that counted down New Year's at 42nd Street, but the one at 14th Street. And it's counting down. And if you go to that, and if you Google that and you go to that climate clock, you'll see we have less than 7 years before we reach a point that will be almost a point of no return. So we need to activate a lot of money to be able to address this in a short period of time, and we need all hands on deck. So how are we able to do that? So next slide, please. So there have been some key developments that I want to bring up. One, global warming has motivated 196 countries to commit to limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And at COP26, a lot of people were disappointed in that because the governments kind of waffled on that, but the scientists did not. And prior to the COP26 meeting, the IPCC, the National Protocol on Climate Change, issued a report that definitively showed that this is happening. And if you want to be in denial of the science, that's your prerogative. If you want to believe 2 + 2 = 3, so be it. But that doesn't change the science and doesn't change the math. So of course, the global warming motivated this 196 countries for the climate protocol of 2015. And the Green Finance and Investment Report estimated the need for $93 trillion in infrastructure investment over 15 years would be required. But we found out later by COP26 that was too little and it would be too late. The green bond financing is a natural fit for low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure assets. But again, as our previous speaker talked about, these protocols or these taxonomies can be confusing. So what happened was, out of a little bit prior to the COP26 meeting, but featured in the COP26 by some finance people known as GFANs, which we'll talk about in point 5, the Paris Climate Bond blended finance concept was introduced. And it's a credit enhancement framework to motivate expanded private capital investment, because the governments can bring capital, but it's private capital that can actually combine with a public finance group, public-private finance working group in developing countries can actually make the difference. And my 5th key development is at COP26, the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, also known as the GFANS Alliance, committed to manage 130 trillion in assets in line with achieving the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal, but also it's there to reduce what we call ANR, and that is essentially adaptation and resilience, and also carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. So the pre-issuance credit, so the use of green bonds proceeds historically, then we'll go into the real world now, from 2007 to 2018, and essentially right up to COP26. This shows where the funds have been used. Adaptation, which is ANR, which is adaptation and resilience, is only 3%. Land use is 3%. Waste management is only 4%. Addressing water issues is 11%. And if you think about developing world nations, their water is under tremendous pressure and needs to be addressed. Transport is about 15%, buildings about 24%. And of course, it makes sense that people were focusing on energy through solar energy, through wind, through water technology like Niagara Falls that's been around for decades or half a century to create energy, as opposed to oil and gas and coal mines energy, coal mining energy. Next slide, please. So basically, and as has been shown, the green bonds, and we'll connect these dots in a minute, the green bonds, specifically the climate bonds, are a bridge to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that we all aspire to, that were created under the UN. And climate mitigation and adaptation, they underpin the meeting of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, there are 17 of them. Now, up until now, the only green bond that made it a requirement that you needed to meet at least one of these SDGs was the Climate Bond Initiative. And hence, one of the issues in the previous speaker's component about the thematic focus of impact finance platforms has been that there's confusion as to the taxonomies. But the climate bond taxonomy under the EU came about and made stringent taxonomies, and we know they work. How do we know they work as opposed to green bonds or ESG bonds? Is because the climate bonds are the only bonds that are meet a rating by Morningstar, Fitch, and other rating agencies. The other green bonds have no ratings. Why is that? Because the climate bond is a bond that actually has stringent taxonomies and consequences if you don't meet those taxonomies. Of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the climate bonds that have been issued, everybody needs to meet one. It's nice to know that at least 8 meet 2, 1 meets 4. We have received our letter of fit for a climate bond, and we made a big deal and big impact in this area because we meet 14 of the 17, and we're moving forward to meet more. And through a sustainable approach, or not a sustainable, but a regenerative approach to the climate bonds, and engaging in those different taxonomies, we can actually meet all 17 eventually if we do a private-public partnership approach, as opposed to a private-private partnership approach that we've currently started with. Next slide. So what motivates climate impact investors? Well, tracking their investments against the SDG goals is really creative and needs to happen, and it is quantitative in nature. Meeting the challenge of climate repair needs to be met, and the SDGs can measure that under their rules. And climate repair is important because we need to do this quantitatively and not just say that we're doing it as others have, and then create a situation of what is called greenwashing. So the Sustainable Development Goals paired up with the climate bond and their taxonomies actually prevents greenwashing, whereas that does not happen with the ESG bonds or other bonds. And measuring the environmental restoration is important, which is required under the climate bonds, and evaluating social improvements. I noticed in the commentary in the chat that somebody brought up the triple bottom line approach. And that is our approach. And the triple bottom line says people first, public improvements, that's the public improvements, is people first, and then environmental is next, and then profit last. But you need to create a profit for the impact investors. Otherwise, they won't put their money in where their mouth is. So we need to evaluate social improvements, and they need to be quantitative in nature. And we need to finally generate some financial successes for these impact investors. Whether we like it or not, this is the way of the world, and this is how we can actually engage the world through the climate bonds and the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the Global Impact Investing Network that I mentioned before. Next slide, please. So one of the benefits of a public-private partnership as to private, which we have received a letter of fit on a climate bond under the waste management taxonomy, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The key benefits are obviously we consume less time and improve monitoring. We promote infrastructure development and local development, and that's really critical in developing world countries. The United States and the EU do not have development banks. They have central banks like other countries like Malaysia or Bangladesh or India, but they don't have development banks. And development banks are really critical for GFANZ. GFANZ members want to provide this $130 trillion but to the development banks, but they have a problem. When you provide the money, sometimes the money disappears. Either dictators take it, or gangs take it, or corrupt politicians take it, or private companies take it and don't deliver on the goods, and they greenwash. So what we're suggesting is there's a mechanism to actually protect against that to the best of our ability. It also increases technical and technological cooperation between governments and private enterprise. It provides elastic services, reducing service costs. It builds cooperative growth through the private sector integration with governments in developing world. And it reduces risk. We risk mitigate by risk sharing with private partners. And this methodology that we're going to be talking about today actually does that. That's one of the key elements. It mitigates risk to the investors, to the private investors, but also to the governments. And it helps to lessen public sector budget constraints. This is an important issue because developing countries, those who seriously want to develop and have their budgets mean something and to develop and deliver on results, need to overcome these issues. And of course, it promotes innovation and creativity. So this is the key element of public-private partnerships. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is the next slide, is the blended finance structure and its mechanics. It has existed previously in the world, and on the right-hand side, you see examples of structures in private equity or debt funds, and you see bond or note issuances. You see grant funding to various forms of that, and the mechanism on the left shows that you have private capital at a market rate, looking for a market rate return, and then below that you have development funding, which comes from public or philanthropic funders. Excuse my language there, and that is really concessional, meaning that they're not looking for a return on investment in the financial world. They're looking for a return on environmental investment. So they're lowering their GHG emissions, they're improving soil quality, they're improving water quality, they're improving the quality of life of their constituents and of their residents and of their citizens. So when you do a blended finance approach, you absolutely have an opportunity. But still what is missing is a mechanism to create the bond, using a climate bond as opposed to other green bond structures for development world capabilities. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So here's the Paris climate bond concept that we spoke about before. And they decided that they were going to bring in a PPA counterparty, and that would be connected to a special purpose vehicle. That's what SPV stands for, project. And that would be an investment vehicle. And they would bring in institutional investors. This is on the left-hand side of this slide. Up above, you have a guarantor. Now, the guarantor, as I spoke about before, was post-bond issuance. Here, the Paris climate bond concept said, can we bring in a guarantor prior to the issuance of the bond so we can get the bond to market. And underneath that, for the special purpose vehicle, we need sponsors, we need lenders. And to the right of that, we need to recycle the capital and investment into these new projects and create a circular economy approach. Now, interestingly enough, the EU, because of the pandemic and because of the crash of the world economy, under Angela Merkel, by the way, I don't know if people know, she is actually, her background is she's a physicist. So she's a scientist and understands the scientific method. And whether you're pro-Merkel or not, she understood this, and she asked the EU Commission and the EU legislature, along with her counterparties in the EU governments, to start an ambitious opportunity to recover and create a circular economy to recover the European economies and the world economies through a circular economy approach, move away from fossil fuels, and create circular capabilities, not just with energy, but other capabilities to take waste and convert it into products that, and when I say products, I don't mean cell phones or dresses or spoons, but we're talking about products that actually reduce environmental impacts, such as soil amendments, such as capabilities to reduce GHG emissions so we can get back to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And by the way, we're currently at 1.2 and we're still seeing huge environmental issues. So we need to act quickly and in a concerted effort. So this is the Paris Climate Bond concept. And what we did is we said, okay, if we take this Paris Climate Bond concept and we marry it with a climate bond and work in a joint venture approach, which we've already created 7 joint ventures, and we've been issued a letter of fit by the climate bond for these 7 joint ventures to raise one single climate bond, which is a infrastructure lift. We can actually address these different climate issues. And the one that we're issued a letter of fit for is the taxonomy under the waste management taxonomy, which stipulates under EU rules, not US definition of a brownfield, but brownfields in the EU are entities that have waste, huge amounts of waste, and need to convert them or need to mitigate them or reduce them or get rid of them. And those brownfields under the waste management taxonomy of the EU climate bond states you turn a brownfield into a greenfield, not 50%, not 95%, not even 99%. You have to do it 100%. That is a heavy lift. It's a heavy requirement, and it is doable. And we received a letter of fit in our 7 joint ventures that are private, but we're now going for private-public partnerships because we believe this will create jobs under the triple bottom line approach through the people first approach, create good paying jobs for people in developing world, but also create educational opportunities for people, which is one of the SDGs, obviously, and also create healthcare capabilities for people that need them. And in developing world, they need them, and they need them rapidly. We need to do this rapidly. So if we could go to the next slide. So what I'm showing here is our current pre-issuance credit enhancement process that we did for a private partnership, but the same applies to a private-public partnership. And but it's a little easier, I think, in the private-public partnership. Excuse me. So the phase 1, I'm showing here the phase 1 is a linchpin. We get a guarantor to issue a letter of intent and show proof of funds. We are in the midst of doing that right now for our private partnership. And the bond, we were told that for our 7 joint ventures, which are 7 projects that we're doing, which we're bundling together, is a 500 million euro infrastructure lift. So it's a 500 million euro bond, which will be issued on the Luxembourg Green Exchange. and it will be purchased by institutions, by private enterprise, and they will put their money into it. How do we know this? Because since 2009, the climate bonds that have been issued have been oversubscribed. For those who don't understand that term, it means that if you're going for 500,000 euros, generally you can raise 750,000 euros or more than 500,000 euros comes to the market and wants to purchase those bonds. And why do they want to purchase them? Because of what we said earlier on, what the impact investors are looking for. They want to know that you're not greenwashing. That's beautiful because the climate bond prevents that from happening because of its strict taxonomies. It gives a marketplace for which to buy the bond, and the issuer of the bond can either do one of two things. If they're oversubscribed, they can either cap it at the 500 million that we're going for and reduce the amount of interest that needs to be paid because of the demand, or we can take all the money and pay the interest that is originally issued. And then deploy those funds, and they have to be not just monetized, they have to be watched and carefully tracked. In other words, there's an audit trail of this. On the right-hand side, when you get a pre-issuance credit enhancement guarantee for 500 million euros, you need about 50 million euros to act as a credit that you need to bring 50 million euros as a credit on 500 million. So if you're started up and you have the capability to do all the things that check off all the 200 plus boxes for a climate bond, but you don't have the funding to go to market, this will give you that entity a credit rating. So the 50 million euros acts as a credit rating until the bond comes to market. You still need about 7.5 million euros. So a loan provider provides that, and that credit instrument brings the bond to market, but it also purchases two surety bonds. One surety bond is confusing because it sounds like a bond that a purchaser would get. Surety bond is essentially a completion bond, or what they use in construction to guarantee the completion of the project. And this surety bond or surety instrument, which is more like insurance, ensures that the guarantor will receive their accommodation fee, which is roughly 3% of the guarantee of 500 million euros, and which is about 30% of 50 million euros. And it also ensures the payback of the credit enhancement loan provider for the 183 days roughly maximum that it would take to bring the bond to market. If the bond never comes to market or is subscribed but is issued but never subscribed, the surety bonds pay out like an insurance policy. But all the bonds that have been issued have all come to market and all have been oversubscribed. So once these elements come together, a definitive agreement is issued, and then we go to step 2, in which the loan purchases the surety bonds first and foremost, then the rest of the funds bring the bond to market, and then the bond then comes to market and the funds are issued, and then they're not only monetized, but they're also tracked to make sure that everything goes where it's supposed to go. Now, in a private-public partnership, what is important here to understand is that the guarantor is a development bank, and that is a sovereign bank or a central bank in a developing world country. That is a sovereign guarantee, and a surety bond is definitively issued with no questions by the surety bond providers. And surety bond providers are normally insurance companies, by the way, that don't insure local entities. They don't insure companies out there, or they don't insure individuals. They insure other insurance companies. But in this case, they will insure this type of mechanism since COP26, or actually since March of 2020, because the REA, the Renewable Energy Association in London, back in 2012, 2013, asked Lloyd's of London, which is one of these types of companies that would issue a surety bond that only insures other insurance companies, would they be prepared to issue types of mechanisms to help prevent the climate crisis? And they said yes. Now, Lloyd's of London is one example. Another example is AON, which used to be known as Equitable. AON is also a surety bond provider, and they too, along with Brown & Brown and other reinsurers, are prepared to do this. But again, if you don't meet the guarantee, if you don't get the letter of fit from the Climate Bond Initiative, the likelihood of getting these surety bonds are very diminished. So if you go for a green bond, a specific green bond or an ESG bond, not likely to get this. So we realize that by staying stringent and sticking to our knitting, this is really important. The last item I would like to issue before we go to questions is that the issue of time is of the essence and the types of taxonomies that are out there for the climate bonds. The climate bond entity in Europe has issued the waste management taxonomy that I described before. They've also issued one for agriculture. They've also issued a taxonomy for shipping, such as container shipping or container ships themselves. They've also issued them for green buildings. So for instance, can you take and sequester carbon in the construction of roads, bridges, and buildings around the world? And that is happening right now. Some of the background that I bring to the table, so that the reason I know about this is because I was the co-chair of a working group in Europe called the Cost Action on Biochar, TD 1107. A cost action is an action that is promulgated and paid for by the EU Parliament to create the ability to fund development in different types of technologies and outcomes. So there are cost actions on geothermal, there's cost actions on cancer treatments, there's cost action on all sorts of things. Ironically, there was no cost action on the coronavirus, which I found quite ironic. But there was a cost action on biochar, and biochar is a material that is thermally converted from waste into a material known as biochar, and it's confusing in and of itself. But it's a very complex situation. Most people, when they look it up, they find that biochar is typically used as a soil amendment to enhance soil. But it also has, if you read the book Burn by Kathleen Draper and Albert Bates, Kathleen Draper is the current chairwoman of IBI, International Biochar Initiative. Albert Bates is a very well-known writer on environment. They issued this book and they describe, prior to that, there was 55 uses of biochar. Now they've actually delineated there's 100,000 uses of it. And the issue is scalability. So how do we get this scaled up? One of the mechanisms is the finance mechanism, the technologies, but also we need waste handlers, and they need to come to the table as the brown fields and convert them into green fields. That's what we're doing right now. So I'll leave it at that. And if we have time, I'll take questions. Otherwise, I put my email and in the chat earlier. And if you want, my email, my WhatsApp and mobile number are here as well. I leave it to you, and you can go to the last slide. Thank you. Oh, we're at the last slide. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we had very interesting two talks, and I will invite Sachin because he raised his hand for questions since long. So I will invite Sachin to ask questions.
So I have a question for Mr. Mahmood. So how profitable it is for the private investor to achieve these goals? You are talking about private-public investment. So I guess the private player wants some profitability out of this. So what do you think about that?
That's an excellent question, Sachin. And by the way, my last name is pronounced Mermel. I know it's crazy, but blame my parents, Marshall Mermel. It's onomatopoeic. It's a little nuts, but it is what it is. So Sachin, your question is actually very relevant. The issue of profitability in the private sector is obviously important. As our previous speaker spoke about, it's caused some harm in the marketplace. If you look at the 3 big enterprises that were at COP26 by nation or by a number of attendees, would have been the third largest nation. The people of the coal industry and the oil and gas industry attended COP26, and they would have represented the 3rd largest nation there by attendees, which is, when you think about it, is insane. But and they're not exactly pro-environment. So, and the reason is because they've been making money hand over fist with large returns on investment for over 100 years. Why would they change? Now, you and I and the rest of everybody here would want it to change because we recognize the existential threat to our planet and to the people and to the health of everyone on this planet. But some people don't change. And I'm sure that Sharon Drew Morgan can give you some really good explanations of why that occurs and what we could do about it. But aside from that, the issue is we still need to bring a return on investment for impact investors. Otherwise, they're not motivated. And motivation is part of the key. But impact investors are different than regular investors. The differentiation for an impact investor is, number one, they want to see that we are actually making a difference in the climate. But they do need a return. So what kind of return are they looking for? They're not looking for to become let's say what I'm trying to think of the term, the kind of investors that are they're going to become billionaires and launch rockets into outer space. That's not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is a return that their platform can give back to their investors. They're usually platforms. So they're usually investment banks or that invest in these types of green bonds or these climate bonds specifically. And they're looking for a decent return. A decent return could be 30% return on investment, 60% return on investment, but they're not looking for thousands of percent return on investment like you see, let's say, at in these other companies like Virgin Galactic and all these other people. So I think what we're looking for, I know mathematically that we approach this always from the most conservative approach. A lot of people do what's called a expected value approach. We don't believe in expected value. We think if you do expected value, you're erring on the side of too aggressive. So we always measure the most conservative approach. So what we've gotten a letter of fit on is a return on investment that is a 60% return on investment by being able to take 7 joint ventures, take their waste and convert them into products, as I said, that will create soil amendments, that will improve soil health around the world, that will create greenhouse gas, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that will improve water quality. And when I say improve water quality, it's a combination of technologies that does this. But what it does is there's different water qualities. A lot of people don't realize that. So there's water quality that has heavy metals in it. We have the ability to deal with that. There's some water treatment plants that have no heavy metals, but they have what is called eutrophication in the water. That's oxygen starvation in the water bodies. And that's usually caused by NPK. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which comes from fertilizers, industrial fertilizers, goes into water bodies and bioswales and destroys the water, and you get green algae. A lot of places around the world, if you go out in your local area, you'll probably see a lake or a water body that has this type of material on it. And we can deal with that and turn that into a profitable ability for the local community. In other words, it's not just making profit for the investors, but it's also making profit for the local communities and creating jobs and cleaning up the environment at the same time. So the measurement that we're looking for is a minimum of 30% return on investment. But we know in this current climate bond that we're pursuing, we can generate a 60% ultra conservative return on investment. That sounds, I know, a little insane, but it is doable, and we quantitatively can measure that. Yes.
Thank you. I will invite Blessing to pose his question, please.
Thanks, Dr. Renuka, for that. And thank you, Masha, for an excellent presentation. To be quick, you mentioned a lot on the challenges with climate finance for developing countries, and you touched particularly on the fact that there are some challenges with investors dealing with developing countries. Now, my question to you is, how do we develop a sustainable climate finance initiative for developing countries when we know that most of these least developing countries have liquidity constraints? Since COVID-19, most of our countries are having challenges because of now we are having less cash inflows, which is affecting our ability to be able to service our debt. So how then can we be able to have a good initiative that not only helps developing countries to fulfill their climate change commitments, but also does not result in increased external debt? Yeah, thank you.
Blessing, that is an excellent question. And that goes to the heart of what I presented. So we came up with a framework that allows us to risk mitigate the developing world countries, especially their central banks and their infrastructure banks, to be able to take in the funds from the GFANZ members, because they've committed 130 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of money. I don't know. A trillion of anything is a lot. A billion of anything is a lot. 100,000 is a lot. So what's 130 trillion? But we know quantitatively, actually, it's not enough. The amount to solve the problem by 2030 is 260 trillion, double the amount, Blessing. But this is the step in the right direction, and we need to act now. And time is of the essence. We don't have choice. Whether you just go to the internet and look up the climate clock on 14th Street at Union Square, and you will see we don't have time. It's not because I'm saying it or because anybody here is saying it or even thinks it. It's the fact. It's a fact. It's not, 2 + 2 = 3, 2 + 2 does equal 4. That's the reality. That's the science. Now, to answer your question, our mechanism says the GFANZ Alliance members are actually asking the same question you're asking. How do we know if we give this money to these central banks, it's not going to disappear into somebody's pocket? So what the GFANZ members now have is a mechanism where they can put the money into a development bank or a central bank or a multilateral development bank. And I'll give you an example. If anybody looks up the African Development Bank, which after COP26 came out with the adoption of taking GFANZ funds for African nations, developing nations, and being able to create a method to get the money into African nations, such as Rwanda, such as South Africa, such as any place in Africa. They have created a mechanism, but what they were missing is what we bring to the table. That answers your question. How do you risk mitigate those funds and that they don't disappear? So the way you do, and they're actually deployed properly. So the way we do it is a blended finance approach does this. Who's paying for this? Not the development bank. The development bank is issued the funds to act as a guarantor, but they don't release the funds. No money is gone out of the bank. And in fact, the GFANZ Alliance can actually what they call ping the bank account of that central bank or that development bank or that multilateral bank to make sure those funds are there. If they disappear, there's going to be heavy, heavy punishment for that country. And we don't want that. So, but it comes with strings attached, big, heavy strings. And what they do is they keep the money in their account. They can't release it, but they use it as a guarantee. And then people such as ourselves go out and borrow the 7.5 million euros from the Europe. And then we get our climate bond in place. And who's funding this? Not GFANZ and not the development countries. They keep their money. It's the investors in, let's say, the Luxembourg Green Exchange, who have oversubscribed since 2009 all these bonds, because they know that the rules of the road are stringent. It's not like, oh, I'm driving down the road and a cop pulls me over and he says, well, you were speeding, but I'm going to let you go. That's not going to happen. And and in this case, you're not just going to get a ticket, you're going to jail, directly to jail, kind of like Monopoly. So do not pass go directly to jail. So the point is that these rules of the road, they're not 100%. Nobody's saying they're 100%, and they're not infallible, but we believe that they are a mechanism to enhance people of like-mindedness, like on this forum, to work together to create the opportunity to get the funding required to deploy the technology that already exists. By the way, the technology to create biochar, there's several technologies. There's gasification, there's pyrolytic carbon capture and storage, there's torrefactions, there's kilns, there's boilers. The one that we know that works the best is pyrolytic carbon capture and storage. It was invented 80 years ago. It's not like it's something brand new, like a new vaccine that they're worried about. This technology has been in existence, but nobody's applied it for this purpose. We can apply it for this purpose, not just us. I encourage my competitors to apply it. There's enough money to go around for everybody. There's enough money to do lots of joint ventures. And by the way, by forming these public-private partnerships and monetizing it, but making sure that the money is directed in the right way and keeping track of it, it's about the best anyone can do. Look, we're all human. There are narcissistic personality disorders out there. There are people that don't have narcissistic personality disorders. There's people that are, just plain Jane guys that are good, and gals out there that are really good at what they do. We need to encourage everybody to step up to the plate and do the right thing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And now I will invite Sharon Drew to pose her question, please.
You're muted.
Sharon Drew, you are muted.
That's the first time I've done that in 2 years. And I'm on Zoom almost every day.
Is that my effect? I hope it's not me.
No, it's you, honey. It's you. I have a question. I haven't heard of these bonds being available in commercial institutions. And why haven't I heard about this? And what needs to happen for people to make them, for Morgan Stanley, for example? When I ask about something like this, I never hear about this. What's stopping them from telling me? Are commercial institutions able to sell these type of vehicles? And if not now, when?
That's an excellent question. And I'm glad you asked it. It's almost like I planned it. That's a great question. And the answer is,
I'm your shill. You gave me $5 in the back.
Yeah, there you go. $5? I thought I gave you 500 million. No, I'm just kidding. So seriously, that's a great question. And the answer to that is because you didn't hear about this, even though it's been around since 2009, because there's 3 industries out there trying to lobby, just like they did at COP26, to prevent this from happening. So you have the oil and gas and coal industry. That's one lobby. And by the way, they represented at COP26 in Glasgow. They had more people other than China and the United States in Glasgow physically. And they were out there knocking on doors. And by the way, you notice that at the end of COP26, India announced that they were going to be net zero by what date? 2070? Give me a break. 2070, we'll all be dead. And Russia said, oh, and China said, we'll be net zero by 2060. We'll all be dead. But you notice the United States stepped in and said they were doing, after that, they were doing a political thing where they didn't want to embarrass the Chinese government. They said, we can do better than that. And we know that they've got, even though China and the United States are politically at odds, they're still working together on this to go to 2040, but that's still not good enough. We need 2030, 2025 in order to save the planet. So not the planet, but to save us. The planet will be here whether we like it or not. the answer to your question of why they haven't been available is because of these of this lobbying effort to prevent it from happening. But the irony of it is the pandemic caused that change. And Angela Merkel, who I said is a physicist by training, woke up and said, holy mackerel, we need a Marshall Plan like World War II, not named after me, but named after George Marshall. And who paid for the recovery of Europe post-World War II? Do you know? It was US bonds. It was bondholders. My parents owned war bonds during the war. My dad was in the US Navy during the war. And post-World War II, they purchased US bonds that helped bring Europe back and Japan back from the brink. And that is, Angela Merkel decided that's what needed to be done. And she mobilized, by the way, I didn't mention this, she mobilized in March through May of 2020, she mobilized 185 trillion euros as seed capital so that the Climate Bond Initiative could issue raise an issuance over time of 100 trillion euros. 100 trillion euros in bonds so that Europe could become a cyclical economy. Now, the crazy thing about it, this only happened in 2020. And
it's tell me where to buy them, and why can't I go to my broker, and why can't other people go?
Well, I'm going to explain that. So in Europe, they're widely available. And you can go to the Luxembourg Green Exchange, and you could go to the Luxembourg Green Exchange and buy them there. But what's interesting is anybody can, as long as they have access to the free market. But in the United States is way behind Europe in this regard. And the reason they're behind is because the United States had somebody named Trump who got us out of the climate accord. We also was a climate denier. And now we have a new administration who's trying to bring us back, but it's kicking and screaming. We have in the United States a big problem. And it's a problem of what I call 2 + 2 = 3 climate deniers. And that is a problem. That doesn't mean we can't do it. You can do it. And by the way, the people at Morgan Stanley are now beginning to wake up, along with Chase, along with Bank of America, along with Wells Fargo and other US institutions. They're beginning to wake up to these green bonds. The problem is they're educating themselves, and they are very reluctant. They're reluctant as can be, but they're coming forth. I've been working together with the Climate Bond Initiative, the EU Commissioner, Sean Kidney, who is the head of the regulator of the Climate Bond Initiative, has set out and worked around the world, not just in the United States, but also in China and in Asia and Africa, to help promote the concept of green bonds, not just for Europe, but for around the world. But the adoption process is difficult. Now, my background is adoption of innovation. So adoption of innovation is graphic. You can look at it as a standard T curve, and we are in the chasm of adoption of green bonds or climate bonds. And that's where we're at. That's that's the answer to your question. But we're rapidly overcoming that. And by the way, there's kurtosis, meaning a shift to the right of the curve. So you have less people willing to observe, but we're pushing that curve back to the left. So there'll be more adopters and early adopters and innovators and early majority to adopt these bonds. Europe is already there. Europe is adopting it. And Europe does have problems. I'm not going to kid anybody. But they also recognize that if we don't, it's kind of like the vaccines. If we don't get developing world vaccinated and dealing with this, we're going to have resurgence of more variants of these viruses, and we're going to end up living with it. So what we need to do is we need to use science-based approach, and we need to use a quantitative-based approach, but we need to be social impact approach, and that will help create a level playing field. Is it going to happen easily? No, nobody says it's easy, but everybody here, and especially you, are capable of helping us make this happen together as a team. So I encourage everybody to join forces to create not just my mechanism, but any mechanism out there that will address the third world and the developing world nations creating a level playing field, better jobs, better health, better quality of water, better soil, better air, and it'll improve for everybody. But hopefully I answered your question that it's an adoption issue, and the United States, ironically, is usually perceived, because of Silicon Valley, as being ahead of the curve. But when it comes to climate issues, it's behind the curve. Europe is the Silicon Valley of climate change right now, believe it or not.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will invite Ernesto to pose his question, and probably we'll take this last question.
Yeah, good morning. Good day, Professor Mermel. This is Ernesto from Ottawa. When designing all this, the enumerated things, are concerns of developing or less developed countries considered in improving their basic needs first? But because do you think the less developed or developing countries taking this seriously, if even they cannot even satisfy the basic needs? What I'm saying is that climate change is a priority overall worldwide, but developing and less developing and less developed countries are more focused on surviving, especially the mitigation brought about by the climate change. So unless we considered first the basic necessity of less developed countries or developing countries, because first world countries are ahead and industrialized, producing all these climate change carbons, and now they're saying, no, you cannot use more than in industry to use producing carbon. And then how can they develop if they will not go into industrialization stage? What can you say about it, Professor Mermel?
Well, first of all, I'm not a professor. I do have an MBA, but I'm not a professor. So I want to make sure that's clear.
Well, thank you.
But,
yeah, sorry.
But you know, I don't want to pretend my credentials are something other than they are. I always am transparent in what I talk about. So you're again, another excellent question. And this is what we need to deal with. Whether you like it or not, time is of the essence. Look at the 14th Street Union Square clock, and you'll see whether you're a developing country or a industrialized country, we're all in deep doo-doo, as they say, to use that American expression. We're in deep problems, and we need to act now. And ironically, it's an irony that the developing nations actually have an opportunity to move ahead and address their issues by using this mechanism. And the bondholders will support it, because we know they will. And the developing countries, again, not every developing country will do what we suggest, but you know, have you ever heard the expression FOMO? FOMO means fear of missing out. So there's a psychology here. You do it with one and they see success, they want to do the same thing. Not everybody. There's an adoption curve here. Some people are on the left-hand side of the adoption curve. Some people are on the right-hand side of the adoption curve. So it has to do with the attributes of the people and the country. A classic example of this is Malaysia. Malaysia has its political problems, but it has a structure of a federal government and a state government. Who controls the wastewater management plants? Who controls the sewage plants? Who controls the landfills? It's not the federal government. It's the state governments. And believe me, they are getting pressure from their population to do something about it, because people are dying. Not just the disease of the pandemic. There are other diseases out there. If the pandemic is causing the problem, they can't treat these other diseases because they're filling up hospitals and healthcare providers are getting sick. So we need to address these things in a systematic or a systemic approach. And we're doing that through this. You need a finance mechanism to get it there. If you don't have that, nothing will happen. Nothing. People aren't going to, they're not going to go out and say, oh, I'll give my my pen as my contribution. It's not going to happen. You need an infrastructure lift to do this. This is the only mechanism that we've seen, and I'm not saying it should be the only mechanism, but it's the one that we believe will happen sooner rather than later. If you wait for GFANZ because of their doubts to say, oh, well, we're going to give money to Central Bank of Malaysia, but how do we know the money's not going to disappear? If you don't give them a risk mitigated approach, they won't give the money. Now they're prepared to give the money. It's the GFANZ members that give the money and put it in the central bank. It's the private enterprises in a public partnership with, let's say, with a state in Malaysia that will take a wastewater treatment plant or a sewage plant and convert it into a green opportunity or a sustainable method or a regenerative, more important, a regenerative approach to society, creating jobs, first and foremost, good paying jobs, creating educational opportunities, creating healthcare capability because you're generating their income there to do it, and with the joint venture partner, and improving the soil, improving the water, improving the air. Lastly, the bondholders get their return. They're on the last end, but they're okay with that because the people who are investing in these bonds want to see this kind of change occur. Not everybody's that way. Some people, only want to see oil and gas. That's all they care about. That's not our audience. Not everybody's our audience. But to answer your question, the means of world enterprise, if we don't make the effort, we are all doomed. Unfortunately, I may sound like a doomsayer, but just look at the science. The Thwaites Glacier is melting. It's unlike the North Pole. The glaciers in the South Pole are on land. As they melt, they raise the water level worldwide. I don't know if you know this, but you can go to the science and look at it. If you need to, I can get you the science on it. When the Thwaites Glacier fully melts, it's going to add two meters of water to the planet. I don't know if you know this, but Wall Street.
Yeah.
Which
I
is
fully agree. I fully agree with you with the climate change, and I'm supporting that initiative. And I think my contention is that climate change will be the last priorities of developed countries. We're hungry citizens will flourishing, especially with the pandemic. But I love your Marshall Plan better. I think global Marshall Plan for the less developed countries will be a good and assured development plan for the global initiative. Thank you very much and good day.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I just want to make one more comment on what you were saying here. Yes, you're right. We are concerned about that. So what is the mechanism? Do we just throw up our hands and give up and wait for, and it's already happening, by the way, in Indonesia. In Indonesia, major cities are undergoing water. They're being flooded. Where does that water coming from? It's part of the Thwaites Glacier melting. And so we need to address it. And it's not just going to be the Thwaites Glacier. As I was about to say, Wall Street, which is Wall Street and Pine, is on bedrock. It's only half a meter above sea level. You're going to have a gondola to go to work in less than 7 years. So my goal is to, and by the way, Lower Battery Park in Manhattan is built on landfill. You're going to have liquefaction. Those 60 and 40-story buildings are only going to be 6 stories or 4 stories tall when they get sucked into the earth. So we need to act now. And by the way, that's for the U.S. investors. It's coming. Now, I'm not worried about Wall Street. I'm more concerned about the developing nations as you are. Is it true that you're going to have players there that are not, and rightly so? I'm starving. I need food now. I don't worry about what's going to happen in 10 years or 5 years or 3 years or 1 year. I need the food now. But we need to act now because the good news is if we create these good quality jobs, there will be food because we'll enhance their soils, we'll improve the soils, we'll improve the crop yields, will improve the ability for people to eat, and will also, by the way, will also improve livestock. I don't know if you know this, but most livestock have a high mortality rate. They don't talk about it because when they send their livestock for slaughter for food, they have to meet a certain requirement in any country, but they always lie about it because there's zoonotic diseases, just like the pandemic is a zoonotic disease. But everybody remembers there was a zoonotic disease in Ireland, the UK, and northern France called mad cow disease, which was Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. By the way, in that disease, 310 people died, and they wiped out all the cattle and the pigs. They incinerated them all. Here in the United States, we have 800,000 plus deaths, and what are they doing about it? So I'm pointing out zoonotic diseases also can be addressed through this approach. So that's my statement there.
Thank you, Marshall. And I would just like to now close by just 2 or 3 sentences that when we are talking about least developing countries, yes, they have to develop and the technologies are needed, but we must think about sustainable development. That is only the shift we need for development now. Because we know new technologies, we know now new ways to go forward, then why not adopt them? Why we should be traditionally thinking of development or technology in the way we have been thinking of. And probably these all shifted towards looking at multidimensional sustainability, the framework with GFS, Global Sustainable Development, development goals have given us, that would allow us to move forward. And probably here Marshall's argument also would be given strength. In a way, we have to move the finance from the developing to developed to developing countries, but that also should be sustainable. Yeah, all right. And I think with the previous speaker, I think we found there are many different platforms, but how we can make synergies. And I think within just this platform and just within this small meeting also, we have seen that these diversities is so much, and how to bring and bridge those diversities together is a question, isn't it? So I leave there, and we will try to make synergies and move forward. I don't think we have time for any social networking today, but I am glad that we had lots of networking and like exchange of views in the chat function. So probably you can have a look at the chat function and we can stop there. So thank you very much today for the first meeting. We had very nice participants today visiting us. So I'm very glad with the good start of this year. And the next meeting will be on 3rd Friday, that is coming week, between 2 and 4. If there are any changes, we will see. So from this year, we have started we will be delivering 2 meetings monthly. And so let us see how it goes. And I invite you, all of you, to submit your proposals for the talk. So that's it for me. I won't go further with my slides or anything because it is too late, but I wish we will continue with such an interesting exchange of our idea exchange here. Thank you very much, everyone, for